When you need mealtime inspiration, it's worth shopping Baker's, where you'll find over 30,000 mouth-watering choices that excite your inner foodie. And no matter what tasty choice you make, you'll enjoy our everyday low prices, plus extra ways to save, like digital coupons worth over $600 each week. You can also save up to $1 off per gallon at the pump with fuel points. More savings and more inspiring flavors make shopping Baker's worth it every time. Baker's, fresh for everyone. Fuel restrictions apply.
Now's the time to save 30% on wedding jewelry, only on BlueNile.com. Make sure your wedding ring is the one with your pick of diamond and lab-grown diamond bands, all hand-finished and graded for excellence. Or surprise her with something blue she'll love for life, like a stunning pair of sapphire earrings. Blue Nile's jewelry experts are available 24/7 to help, from fit questions to style advice. Right now, get up to 30% off at BlueNile.com. BlueNile.com.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Single Tracks Podcast. My name is Jeff, and today my guest is Sarah Hunter. Sarah is a licensed clinical mental health counselor in the state of North Carolina and a PMBIA Level 1 mountain bike instructor. Her practice includes individual and couples counseling services, plus mountain bike therapy and counseling for athletes and outdoor instructors. Thanks for joining me, Sarah.
Yeah, it's great to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
So tell us a little bit about your background. What led you to get into counseling and specifically to working with folks connected to the outdoors?
Yeah, so it was actually the outdoors. In college, I needed a change of environment. And so I decided to take a NOLS semester. And yeah, NOLS, the National Outdoor Leadership School. And so for 95 days, got to explore and adventure and do really hard things physically and emotionally in the desert of Arizona and then up in the Pacific Northwest. And gosh, on that NOLS semester, I learned so much about myself and fell in love with the wilderness. And my instructors and my fellow students on that course helped me so much, and it changed my life trajectory so much that I decided I wanted to do that myself. And so I graduated from college at the University of North Carolina, Wilmington. And then right after graduation, set up my Chevy Trailblazer to live in and set out to, I was an intern at NOLS for a little while and then took my instructor course and worked full time for a few years. And then when I was ready for that less transient lifestyle, I struggled with that a little bit when I moved back to Asheville and went to counseling myself. And my therapist helped me realize that the counseling relationship is very similar to that relationship that I had with my NOLS students. So yeah, I decided to go back to school for that and knew that I always wanted to incorporate the outdoors into therapy when I went back to school and started my private practice. I worked for an agency for a while and then started my private practice back in 2019 and have been working with folks on the bike through counseling since then.
Wow. Is it common for counselors to incorporate outdoor stuff? I mean, clearly a lot of us benefit from it, but is that something that you had to kind of figure out yourself, or did you learn about this kind of through your education?
I learned about it through my education. I think for me, it was pretty experiential, where the outdoor adventure helped me so much in my life that I knew I wanted to use that as a way to support other people too. And so I started to research it and learn about it. And it's a very small population of counselors that utilize adventure therapy, especially in the individual setting. A lot of folks do it in the group setting with adolescents.
Yeah. Well, so, I mean, clearly for a lot of us, we recognize the health and psychological benefits of spending time outdoors. But is it true for everybody? Does everybody benefit from it, or some people just wired that way to experience that?
Yeah, it's true for everyone, but it can also look different for everyone.
Okay.
So for some of us, it is going on really long bike rides. And for some people, it's laying on the ground and feeling the earth beneath them and getting the sun on their face. But there is evidence that shows that when we walk into the forest, when we walk outdoors, we're able to engage the parasympathetic nervous system, which helps us slow down and be more present, grounded. and engaged.
Hmm.
So yeah, the outdoors is actually a natural co-regulator for us and helping us feel more grounded and calm.
Huh. Interesting. I mean, is this something though that like people who live even in cities can access, or is this something that like to get the full benefit, you really have to like get out into the forest, like you said?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is something that people in the cities can access. It's just much harder, right? I think it's
Hmm.
finding those green spaces, or, sometimes people use, like in the counseling setting, can utilize a window where there's a lot of
Hmm.
greenery and trees, and being able to just witness and watch and be present in that way, it can still
Hmm.
be regulating for the nervous system.
Yeah. Yeah. It is for me for sure. Like every time I've had to like find a new place to set up for work, like setting up a home office or, an office outside the house, like number one is got to have a window that I can like see out of my
Yes.
peripheral vision, even though I'm staring at the computer all day. Cause yeah, it definitely, even just seeing the outdoors seems to make a difference.
Yes, absolutely.
So one of the things that you talk about a lot is this idea of adventure therapy.
Mhm.
What exactly is adventure therapy, and how does that work?
Yeah, great question. So, adventure therapy is an experiential therapy modality that utilizes outdoor adventure specifically to kinesthetically engage clients, just meaning that
Hmm.
is very experiential. Rather than sitting and talking about something, you're out
Hmm.
in the outdoors doing an activity that's not necessarily related to the problem or struggle that you're seeking counseling for, but things come up that allow you to work
Hmm.
through a process that is very helpful for what it is that you're working on. And so
Hmm.
specifically for me, I utilize mountain biking for folks with complex trauma, which is multiple developmental traumas over a period of time instead of just one isolated traumatic incident.
Okay.
And for those folks, we can get stuck in these protective patterns of behavior that really used to serve them in the midst of their trauma, but no longer serve them in the life that they're living now. And so, what happens is I'm helping them learn how to relate to their nervous system in a different way. And so, when they're biking and learning how to ride, this really is helpful for folks who have never mountain biked before, or who are
Ah.
newer to riding. And so, I'm teaching them how to mountain bike. And as they're learning, that threat response in the nervous system gets activated.
Hmm.
That's very similar or the same to the sympathetic or parasympathetic activation that occurs when they get trauma triggered out in the world. And so I'm helping them slow
Hmm.
that down and learn how to relate to their nervous system in a different way while we're out there.
Hmm.
And there's some other things that we're doing too, like those protective behaviors can show up where we shut down and want to give up, and then we work through that and try to
Hmm.
do it in a different way. So yeah, it's just very experiential.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, this is fascinating because, yeah, you're saying like it activates that threat response and people are going to want to like give up. Like,
Mhm.
are you purposely making it challenging or is it just like, I mean, I guess it's been a long time since I learned how to mountain bike, but I mean, are you saying that just the experience of doing it for the first time is challenging for people and activates that response?
Yeah, it's both.
Hmm.
That first session, we're in the grass. We are learning about the bike. And so it is
Hmm.
both where it is activating just to go and do it. And we're talking about that. And I'm normalizing and validating that experience for them
Hmm.
and helping them ease into it. And there's a process of titration, which means we're just approaching the stressor slowly and in a safe way, meaning
Hmm.
that when I'm teaching them body position, I'm going to first talk about it and then I'm going to show them and then I'm going to have them like get on the bike while I'm holding the bike. And so we're slicing
Hmm.
it thinner and thinner and thinner, helping them learn how to feel this in their body in a safe way.
Hmm.
But it still causes activation. And then I'm helping them slow down and settle into that activation and regulate into it so they can actually feel that emotion that they're feeling and recognize that they're actually still safe while they're
Hmm.
feeling that emotion.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah. And you mentioned, I think you said kinesthetically engaged individuals.
Kinesthetic learning is learning by doing.
Okay.
And so that's that experiential component where they are getting, so let's say I am teaching someone downhill body position. And so we're working on that ready position, and they're going downhill for the first time, and they're getting to experience that sensation in their body where they might feel a little bit anxious. But we just talked about, okay, so yeah, when you feel that anxious feeling in your chest, maybe it's a fluttery feeling when you're going downhill. I want you to notice that and then take a deep exhale. And remember that you have one finger on the brakes, that you can stop when you need to. And so I'm really helping them through that experience. They're feeling it in their body and they're able to work through it in the moment.
Yeah, interesting. Well, yeah, now this brings to mind too, like, I guess for a lot of us, who are experienced riders and who are not going through this in like sort of a clinical environment, we use mountain biking to sort of self-medicate, right? Like we're looking for that, like there's benefits to being in that flow state when you're on the trail and where like, you're kind of locked into what you're doing and not letting other stuff kind of cloud your thoughts and get in the way. Like, are there similar benefits to people who are regular riders?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, what you just said, and that's one of the reasons why I love to bike so much, is mountain biking forces us to be present. And we have so many distractions in our lives, right? So many distractions.
Yeah.
And when we're riding, we have to be present. We have to look out for the roots and the rocks and tune in with how we're feeling and what we're doing. So yeah, that is absolutely beneficial. And also the bilateral stimulation of riding a bike, which is like cross body movement, it really helps connect. It connects our body to our brain, and it helps us also connect our rational thinking brain to that more survival brain and allows us to process things from a more grounded state. And so being able to move in that way is just very grounding and regulating for everyone.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, what about the flip side to that? Are there signs that someone could be like spending too much time outdoors? Like, for example, if our relationships with friends or family are suffering, and a lot of people maybe are using their time outdoors like to avoid stuff. How do you know if you are using that like in an unhealthy way?
Yeah, another great question. This is different for everyone. And I think, yes, if someone is neglecting aspects of their life by spending a lot of their time outside, you can assume that would suggest avoidance. And I know I'm guilty of this myself. I remember in my early 20s, I was so excited to go work a really long Knowles course because there were things that I didn't want to deal with in my life. And I think that it's really easy to slip into patterns of avoidance and focus on the things that are fun when other parts of our lives become challenging. And we just have to be really honest with ourselves about that and why we're spending time outside. And yeah, like for example, asking ourselves, am I going on this ride because it feels good and it's enriching and supportive for me? Or is it because I'm avoiding, for example, conflict or these difficult emotions that I don't actually want to sit with?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and a lot of times too, like we say it jokingly that like we're addicted to mountain biking or whatever, but like, is that a real thing? Like, could you be addicted to mountain biking?
Yeah. I mean, I think we can be addicted to anything really. Right. And that goes back to that avoidance piece where if we are using something to avoid our current, something that's going on that we really don't want to face, and we're using mountain biking as a way to keep running away from that. Sure. I mean, I don't want to say yes, for sure, we can be addicted to mountain biking, but at the same time, I think it's easy to slip into that pattern of doing something as a way to avoid what's happening within ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, as someone who offers couples counseling, I'm wondering if you have some advice for how we as individuals or maybe collectively as mountain bikers, how we can avoid conflicts on the trail. It seems like this is a sort of an ongoing issue in a lot of places, especially as more people are heading outdoors. Do you have any tips for people for avoiding these conflicts or just maybe dealing with them in a more positive way?
Yeah, I mean, gosh, I think leading with kindness. I think it's a good general rule of being kind, direct, and respectful, and following the rules of the trail system or wherever it is that you're recreating, and remembering that we're not the only people out there. And it's our duty as a member
Mm-hmm.
of the mountain biking community to respect all the trail users, including equestrians and hikers, trail runners, and that we're all out there to have a good time, and that we're all out
Right.
there for this shared love of the outdoors, and that there's a
Mm-hmm.
connection between all of us out there. And so coming back to that, and just like in relationships, when we're recreating, score settling doesn't get us anywhere.
Right.
Yeah, that
Yeah.
it's about learning to work together with one another and address each other with compassion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I wonder if part of it too is like, again, getting back to this idea of using mountain biking as like, as our own personal therapy in a lot of ways, right? Like you have a really bad day and you're like, I need to go for a ride. I'm really angry. I need to like get this out. And then, yeah, the beginning of the ride, a hiker is in your way or whatever. And it's like, sometimes that stuff just blows up, I guess.
Yeah, totally. And yeah, that's tough because, you are having a hard day. And when we're having a hard day, it's much easier to get frustrated with people. And so I think that that's one of those places where being more in tune, right? If you're using that mountain bike to go blow off steam, be aware of that. Like, I might be more irritable today, right? Like using that self-awareness.
Wear a sign that says,
yeah. And just knowing that, like, if I do run into a hiker or something, I might need to slow down before I react. Yeah. And I think like going on a group ride, the same thing can happen where if somebody stops in front of you, it's just remembering that you chose to go on a group ride that day, that you chose to be out there in a space where there are other hikers out there.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. That was another one of my questions. And I guess a lot of these questions are like, this is me asking questions about my problems on the trail. But yeah, a lot of times I will get frustrated, or I'll find myself frustrated on a group ride when somebody's in my way. And yeah, I just, there's got to be a better way to reframe that, right? Like that it's not their fault, that it's my fault. Like, is that a good way to look at it?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a great way to look at it. And I think, again, remembering what you chose that day, that group rides aren't necessarily for getting your PR or like having the fastest ride of your life. And yeah, just remembering like, oh yeah, I chose to ride with this person today. And that means that they're going to stop in front of me sometimes. And I think also having empathy for that person. They might feel bad. They might feel embarrassed. And I think like reflecting on that can help us soften a little bit and feel less frustrated. And also like remembering that I've been there at some point. I've had to put a foot down or stop on a section of trail, and that'll be me again in the future too.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. That's it. It goes both ways. For sure. Yeah. A lot of people will be like super apologetic and you're like trying to encourage them like, no, it's fine. It's fine. Like, I'm not upset. But then other times, for me, like I've lately been trying to just tell myself that, if somebody stops in front of me, then it's on me to like do a track stand or like find some way to stay on the bike. And it's my own skills that are limiting me from being able to like get around them or stop and get going again. But yeah, it doesn't always work. Yeah,
totally. It doesn't. And I think that that's okay too, right? That it's not really anybody's fault there. It's just something that happens. Right. And I think that sometimes we are just going to have to get on our bike and being okay with that also being okay that you might feel frustrated. I think that that's something that, that we can get tripped up on, is being frustrated with our frustration. When really, then that causes us to cycle a little bit more and might cause more frustration with that other person, the more upset we get. And so like being okay, yeah, I am frustrated that I had to step off my bike right now, and that's okay. Yeah. I can take a deep breath and get back on my bike.
Yeah, that's great advice. So another thing when it comes to mountain biking, especially, a lot of us, men and women, are guilty of what some of us might call mansplaining. So obviously mountain biking is a sport that takes years to learn, in terms of like bike skills and repairing things and fitness and all of that stuff. And in my experience, a lot of the unsolicited advice that people give, it generally comes from a good place of wanting to help. But I'm curious, is there a better approach? Like, is there a way that you can give someone advice without without mansplaining.
Yeah, I love this because you're right. That unsolicited advice really does come from a good place. And yeah, and some folks just don't want it. And so I think that,
Right.
yeah, I think
Yes.
asking someone if they would like pointers is always a kind thing to do. And because you never know what kind of ride someone's wanting that day or what kind of day they've had before their ride. Like we said before, someone may really want a time to just like slow down and be by themselves and be really quiet. Even if they are struggling, they might not want that advice. And so, like, for instance, when I'm leading a group ride and I see someone who could use some pointers, I'll just ask if they want tips or not that day and trust them on that. And if they do, I'll give it. And if they don't, I'll be like, oh, sweet. Okay. Hope you have fun.
Hey, it's Kaylee Cuoco for Priceline. Ready to go to your happy place for a happy price? Well, why didn't you say so? Just download the Priceline app right now and save up to 60% on hotels. So whether it's Cousin Kevin's Kazoo Concert in Kansas City, go Kevin, or Becky's Bachelorette Bash in Bermuda, you never have to miss a trip ever again. So download the Priceline app today. Your savings are waiting.
Go to your happy place for a happy price. Go to your happy price, Priceline.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What's your success rate with that? Like how many people say, yes, I want some tips? I'm just curious.
Yeah. Most people say yes when you ask in that way.
Oh,
That's been my
interesting.
experience.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is that most people say yes. And when they say no, that does happen. That feels great because I have asked, I'm not worried about them and I know what they want. And they definitely know best about what they want.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting. Well, so one other thing that I struggle with from time to time, again, in the like group ride scenario is how do you encourage someone when they're having a bad ride? For me personally, and I'm sure it's my personality, but I'm never sure what to say. And my default is to just kind of brush off complaints. You know, someone says they're tired or like they hate this trail or whatever. What are some better ways that I could be more supportive than to just ignore someone?
Yeah, I think again, it's like asking how you can be supportive, because I get that it can feel like, oh, I don't really know what to do, and brushing someone off can feel dismissive, but you also don't want to just like step in and try to be supportive in the way that you think is best. And so asking them like, hey, you know, one thing, like if you're close with them, you can let them know like, hey, I'm noticing that you might seem off today. Is there anything that I can do for you or anything you want to talk about? Any way I can support you? And if you aren't that close with them, like if it is a group ride and it's someone you don't know, you can just ask like, hey, is there anything I can do to help support you right now?
Yeah. And just let them vent because sometimes I do ask and you get the whole thing. And then other times, I mean, I think in some ways too, it's like kind of selfishly, I start to internalize the complaining and the things and like, oh, this is ruining my ride now. But yeah, you're right. It's better to ask a question than to make a statement, it sounds like.
Yeah, absolutely. Because that allows them to, you know, if they do need something, they can ask for it. And if they don't want that, then they don't have to. And it also does help you feel like, okay, I've done what I can do to support them. Because again, that comes from the kindness of your heart. You want to be there, you want to support them, and also appreciate what you're saying too, is that sometimes it's like, we don't want to tolerate their discomfort. And so then at that point it's just being honest with ourselves about that. And like, okay, well, they're going to have a bad ride, but that doesn't mean I have to have a bad ride. Like if they don't want support and they keep complaining, then I can, you know, tend myself and take care of myself today.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so another thing that I think is pretty common for a lot of mountain bikers is difficulty coming back from an injury. And obviously, like as a part of coming back from an injury on the bike, there's like fear and depression. And while a lot of us focus exclusively on the physical healing side after an injury, how can counseling help riders with sort of the mental or the psychological recovery?
Yeah, I've actually worked with a few folks who are coming back after a cycling injury, and it really does help people with that mental and emotional component. It helps them learn to relate to their emotions in a supportive way, because let's be real, like there is an emotional component to injury.
Yeah.
And also the fear, especially after a cycling injury, your nervous system is going to get more activated when you think about that feature, or when you think about getting back on a road bike after a car accident or something like that. Like you're going to need to work on that nervous system response to that threat. And counseling can be so helpful for that. And with the emotional part, it's learning to have compassion for these emotions. I think so often we just don't want to feel these emotions when we're injured. We just want to focus on getting physically better. And I like to help people work on, of coursing those emotions. Like, of course, I feel really sad that I can't get on my bike today after work. It's so sunny and I just want a way to blow off some steam, but I can't do that today.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess you're right. I mean, there's all those emotions, not just like coming back from an injury, but it's like during that recovery period. And yeah, I've definitely seen a lot of folks that's probably the hardest time for them, is having to be off the bike and just not being able to do the thing that they love. Because again, so many of us use mountain biking as kind of a form of therapy.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that recovery period can be such a dark time for athletes, where really not knowing what to do with themselves, not knowing how to spend their time, really missing that thing that they love to do so much, and really being kind and compassionate to that experience is hard. I've been there. I can, sometimes when I fall off my bike, the first thing I think about before I even know if I'm injured or not is, what am I going to do if I'm injured? I think it's such a realistic place to go for those of us that love this sport so much.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I've heard of lots of people that way, that, especially if it's like you've been injured before and you've had like a long recovery period. Yeah. I've heard of people, kind of in that like split second as they're falling off the bike, they're thinking, oh no, I'm going to be off the bike for 4 weeks. I can tell already.
Yeah.
And so, that's a lot of times that's the scariest part. It's not the physical, but it's actually the emotional part of it.
Yes.
So another question I have for you is about calming nerves on race day, or even before a challenging ride. I know I'm not a racer, but I definitely get nervous when riding somewhere new, or like doing a really big ride that, I've never ridden that far before, or I know it's going to be physically challenging or even technically challenging. What tips do you have for people trying to calm their nerves before a big ride?
Yeah, there's a lot to this. And, I'll talk a little bit about leading up to that big ride or race. It's identifying what you feel most anxious about and then being prepared. And so, for example, if like nutrition is something that you're really worried about, if you're going on your first longer ride that's technical and you're going to be out there all day, or if it is a race, spending time preparing for that nutritional aspect, researching and getting all your food dialed before you go can really help ease those nerves. So you feel confident in what you're doing, in that thing that you have felt anxious about. I think another part is understanding your body's manifestation of stress and anxiety. And just like getting to know that, I call them clues. Like, what is the clue? What's my clue in my body that lets me know I'm anxious? And so I can feel that. I know that it's there, and then I can help myself regulate. And so getting to know your body and your stress response in that way can help you identify tools that can serve you on race day and leading up to race day.
Yeah, what you just said is very logical, right? It's like identifying, like, what are you nervous about? And then trying to address it, like getting the information that you need, or like you said, practicing or dialing in nutrition or whatever the case may be. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. And then some of those emotions are not problems to solve. Being in a race is stressful. Going on a big ride can bring up some fear. And that's a time where our emotions aren't a problem to solve, and there's something to just be with and have and work with. And that's okay too. And that's, getting to know those emotions in your body, and also knowing how to help you soothe yourself when you need to. And I also think another cognitive thing that's helpful is like leading up to a big ride or race, rather than just having outcome oriented goals, it can be helpful to have process oriented goals, such as like when I'm on this big ride today, it's not just about doing it a certain amount of time. I want to try to do like 2 wheel lifts on this ride at some point today, just to help you feel successful in other ways, in case the ride as a whole doesn't go as well as you'd hoped for.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, that's great advice for sure. Preparing yourself, because a lot of times we're, like you said, very focused on the outcome and not necessarily on the journey, which it's important. So one of the things I read on your website that you wrote was that finding community in a transient lifestyle can be isolating. And that really resonated with me for sure, because I feel like these days, especially with like pandemic, and a lot of people were like making changes and, deciding to live the van life or finding like a new career as an athlete. Maybe they weren't prepared for this kind of thing. So do you think people are surprised though when they find that this lifestyle can be sort of isolating?
Yeah, I mean, I think that can be different for everyone. I think it can be dreamy to go and live in a van and you see all these pictures of people on social media smiling and doing this thing and having a great time and maybe meeting up with people, but that's not always how it is. And it can be really isolating to live in a vehicle by yourself or with just one other person, because we do need community. And so I think staying connected to those you love through letters, planning times to meet up, going on group rides, or like finding other ways, trail work days or something in the areas that you're visiting in order to connect with the community at large can be really helpful for that. And I think something that some folks aren't really thinking of when they're thinking about setting off on this like epic journey in their van.
Yeah. Yeah. And I never really thought about it from an athlete perspective too, because, especially if you're a professional who's traveling for races and things, I mean, that's your job. And my goodness, we just talked about like having nerves before races and then on top of that, like having this kind of potentially isolating experience. It's gotta be tough. I mean, what do you recommend for athletes in terms of how maybe they can deal with that or reduce the chance of loneliness on the road?
Yeah, I think getting to know what you need. And this is one of those things, again, about getting curious, reflecting, and identifying who your people are and what your coping skills are. What are the things that you know that you need in order to feel nourished in terms of connection and in terms of supporting your mental health? And really being proactive about that. I think that's the hard part is sometimes we can know what we need and then we get tired and, we are on the road or we have a big race. But it's important to know how to take care of ourselves and be proactive about that. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm sure that can be tough. So speaking of athletes, some of the athletes I've interviewed over the years have told me that being a professional athlete, to them, it feels like a very self-centered lifestyle. And to me, that's pretty understandable. I mean, obviously, like your goal is, your training and your workouts and your nutrition and, it's all about you and your performance. But I'm curious, like, is it enough as an athlete to just recognize this and say, yeah, it's a very self-centered lifestyle? Or are there things that an athlete can do to maybe like break out of that or at least make it more healthy?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's up to the individual. It might be okay for someone to say, yeah, this is a self-centered lifestyle and I'm choosing that. And I think it's about being really honest with what you're okay with and is that congruent with your lifestyle. And so if someone's feeling like they're just doing everything for themselves and that's uncomfortable for them, then maybe that's trying to tell them something. You don't have to change based on whatever it's telling you, but it might be important to just dig into that a little bit and get curious about it. And I think then, getting curious about it leads to, well, what are ways that I could be less self-centered and more connected to the people that I care about and giving back to them.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, getting back to this idea of adventure therapy, what have you seen in terms of results from the folks that you've worked with? Like how effective is it? And And what are kind of like the benefits that you see most often for people?
Gosh, when I started this, I was like, oh, this will just be cool. This is going to be helpful for
I get to
people,
mountain
and
bike.
I get to mountain bike at work.
Yeah. Yeah.
I had no idea how powerful it would be for some folks. Especially what I see often is that people who are sitting on my couch in the office, for folks who have complex PTSD, can go into dissociation and disconnection so easily. And it's really hard to connect to themselves, connect to their body. And so for folks, when I see that, that's when I say, hey, let's go outside. Would you be open to trying mountain bike therapy? And for those people, it is incredibly powerful because they're connecting to their body in a new, fun and safe way, working through things that they never thought that they could. So they're gaining confidence. They're getting that embodiment of connecting to their body. They're working through these patterns of behavior that keep them in isolation. And so they're learning a new skill where they get to go on a group ride and make friends. And they're also just feeling better about themselves. And so I'd say it's been so much more powerful than I ever could have imagined, and really helpful for those people who do feel stuck in their lives and need some literal movement, but also movement in their trauma treatment. Like, it's just a much more quicker and more effective way to work through things.
Yeah. Well, and obviously the goal is not to turn people into mountain bikers, but do people stick with it? Like, do you know, like after the therapy is complete or whatever, are they still doing it because they enjoy it? Or for a lot of people, is it just like it's a tool that they use and then they kind of move on?
Yeah, it's different for folks, but most of the time I see them sticking with it because it has been pretty life-changing for them. And it's something that helps them, again, be in their body, feel good about themselves, something to work through that's not their trauma, right? Like they can go and learn new mountain bike skills and see them progressing, doing races. It's really sweet to see. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. That's awesome. Well, obviously too, you see these benefits in your own life and for you personally. So what to you is the biggest benefit of mountain biking that you get out of the sport?
Gosh, it's so hard to name one thing. For me, I think like it's so much fun. And that presence we talked about earlier, my mind goes often. And with the work that I do, like as a NOLS instructor, I was living in my car, climbing in between courses or living in a tent on course. And so I miss being immersed in the outdoors all the time. And so I love going on really long mountain bike rides out in Pisgah and just being in my body all day in the outdoors and not really having to think about anything else about my ride. And so I think that's probably my favorite thing about it, and spending time with friends in that way too.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Mountain biking is special that way. It's hard to find something else that does the same thing, that engages us in so many different ways all at once.
Yeah.
Well, Sarah, thanks so much for taking the time to chat. This is super helpful for me and hopefully for our listeners as well. So thank you.
No, this was great. I enjoyed all your questions and really appreciate the opportunity.
Awesome. Well, you can connect with Sarah and find out more about her practice at sarahhuntercounseling.com. And we'll have that link in the show notes. That's all we've got this week. We'll talk to you again next week.